Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel. Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel.
In your headlines tonight, managing supply. Sri Lanka to work with 2 new private international companies to supply petrol and diesel. Another private company to supply jet fuel to the island. New funding. US announces $6 million in emergency assistance to respond to Sri Lanka's economic crisis. To avert a shortage, Sri Lanka to import 50,000 metric tons of rice under Indian credit line signed in March. Headwinds. The United States announces the biggest interest rate hike in almost 30 years to tame surging prices of food and other essential consumer items. All this and much more coming up tonight, this Thursday, the 16th of June, 2022.
Best ever sunlight. Dan rupial 200ක best ever milakata.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. You're joining us on First at 9, AdaDerana English News Service. And I'm Indivari Amwanta. The United States announced today that it will provide $6 million in emergency assistance to address the needs of marginalized and vulnerable communities impacted by Sri Lanka's economic crisis. This new funding will also provide technical assistance to the Sri Lankan government as it implements economic and financial reform measures to stabilize the economy in line with an anticipated International Monetary Fund package. Now, the US envoy in Colombo, Julie Chung, says the United States is committed to supporting the Sri Lankan people faced with economic and political challenge. Chung went on to say in a statement today that the United States, as a long-standing development partner, will continue to champion efforts that promote sustainable economic growth and good governance in Sri Lanka. This emergency funding through the US government's development arm, the US Agency for International Development, responds to emerging or unforeseen complex crises overseas. The US Embassy in Colombo said part of this funding will go to USAID's Social Cohesion and Reconciliation Project to support small-scale agricultural productivity and micro-enterprises in communities that traditionally experience high poverty rated and are especially impacted by the crisis. This funding is expected to also support public sector efficiency and resource management through USAID's project to accelerate results in trade, national expenditure and revenue. The $6 million in new assistance is part of a much larger package of foreign assistance from America to meet the current need in Sri Lanka. The embassy statement said that the United States will continue to add to its significant ongoing investments and assistance projects in Sri Lanka to help meet the immediate and long-term needs of the people of Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that a draft roadmap to address the current economic crisis will be presented to Parliament to obtain the ideas and suggestions of parliamentarians before finalising it. The Premier said this during a meeting with members of Parliament to discuss the current economic situation of the country. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe met with members of Parliament last evening to brief them on the current economic situation of the country. Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, Mahinda Siriwardana, led a presentation with a breakdown of the current economic crisis and the short-term and medium-term goals of the government. Following the presentation, a discussion was held with the parliamentarians on possible methods that could be used to mitigate the economic disaster. The Prime Minister has explained that a draft roadmap will be presented to Parliament, which would allow the members of Parliament to present their ideas before finalising it. The members of Parliament, including former Finance Minister Ali Sabri, COPE Chairman Professor Charitha Herath, Opposition MPs Dr. Harsha De Silva and Iran Vikramaratne had attended the meeting. Now, the government has decided to import 50,000 metric tons of rice under the Indian Loan Assistance Programme. The decision was made following a discussion held at the Prime Minister's office today to allocate necessary funds to the State Trading Corporation under the Indian Loan Assistance Programme. The Prime Minister's Media Division said that the purchase is expected to avert a possible rice shortage in the future and to curb the abnormal rise in prices of rice. The meeting held at the Prime Minister's office was attended by the Minister of Trade, Commerce and Food Security Nalin Fernando, former Minister Sagala Ratnayaka and Secretary to the Prime Minister Saman Ekanayaka and other public and private sector officials. Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires has stressed the need for empathy and understanding of the international community towards Sri Lanka as the island faces its worst economic crisis. During a recent meeting with the President of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister was able to brief him on the progress the island has made on a number of other fronts. Also speaking to the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan in another meeting, the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister highlighted the importance of the long-standing and mutually supportive friendship with Japan. During his visit to address the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, Minister of Foreign Affairs Professor G.L. Pires met with President of the Human Rights Council recently. During the meeting, the Foreign Minister briefed the UNHRC President on the current socio-economic situation in Sri Lanka and the need for empathy and understanding of the international community. He has also highlighted the measurable and verifiable progress made by Sri Lanka, including changes to the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the proposed 21st Amendment to the Constitution, as well as strengthening independent commissions, the work of the Office of National Unity and Reconciliation, the Office on Missing Persons, the Office for Reparations and engagement with civil society. In response to the current economic crisis in the country, the President of the Human Rights Council has expressed his willingness to assist Sri Lanka in this respect. In another meeting in Geneva, the Foreign Minister has met with the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Miyake Shingo, where the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister has highlighted the importance of the long-standing and mutually supportive friendship with Japan. In response, the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan noted that Japan wishes to deepen and strengthen cooperation with Sri Lanka at international level. The Sri Lankan Foreign Minister also met with the permanent representative of Brazil to the United Nations office, where he emphasized Sri Lanka's eagerness to engage more actively with countries in Latin America. Now, Sri Lankan Navy has apprehended 64 more persons who are suspected of attempting to illegally migrate from Sri Lanka via sea routes. The arrest was made during an operation in the eastern seas of Trincomalee yesterday upon an interception of a suspicious local fishing trawler. The 64 persons apprehended are identified as residents of Trincomalee, Mullaitivu and Jaffna and aged between 2 and 55 years. The suspects also include 7 individuals involved in the illegal migration racket. Those arrested have been handed over to the Trincomalee Harbour Police for further investigations. This is the 3rd suspected illegal migration attempt thwarted by the Navy within the Sri Lankan waters in the last week. Ministry of Education has declared tomorrow as a holiday for all government and government-approved private schools. The decision has been made by the ministry by considering the current challenges pertaining to transportation in the country. Meanwhile, the Education Ministry said that applications for enrollment of grade 1 students for the year of 2023 have been published online. Applications should be submitted via the registered post before the deadline, that is the 16th of July. More information can be obtained on the website www.moe.gov.lk. Now, the lack of fuel affects the transportation sector the most. Details after this break.
3.
Welcome back to the news. To ensure an uninterrupted fuel supply to the country, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said the 2 new private international companies have been selected to supply petrol and diesel to Sri Lanka, while another private company has been selected to supply jet fuel. Speaking to reporters today, the subject minister also said that fuel refined at the Sapukaskanda refinery on a daily basis, which amounts to about 350 metric tons of petrol and 600 metric tons of diesel, will be used by the government to build up a fuel reserve. A shipment of 40,000 metric tons of diesel arrived at the Colombo port this afternoon as the final fuel consignment obtained from the Indian line of credit to Sri Lanka. According to Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara, unloading of the cargo was expected to begin this evening following fuel quality checks. The Indian credit facility that included an initial $500 million and the extended facility of $200 million was able to provide relief to Sri Lanka for nearly 3 months. Another facility of $500 million is agreed from the Exim Bank of India, which is expected to be received soon. Until such time, Sri Lanka is looking at options to secure uninterrupted supply of all types of fuel into the country in a bid to reduce long queues for fuel. Shortage of fuel has a greater impact on the transportation sector among other sectors largely dependent on diesel. In this backdrop, Energy Minister Kanchana Wijesekara revealed today that 2 new private international companies have been selected to supply petrol and diesel to the country.
ඊයේ රාත්‍රී රැස්වුණු කැබිනට් අනුකාරක කමිටුව අනුමැතියක් ලබා දුන්නා තවත් සමාගම් දෙකකට අවශ්‍ය පෙට්‍රල් සහ ඩීසල් මෙරටට ආනයනය කිරීම සඳහා ගිවිසුම් ගත වීමට. ඒ අනුව අපි ඔවුන්ට letter of award කියන එක අපි ඔවුන්ට යවලා තියෙනවා. ඒ අනුව ඔවුන්ට ණයවර ලිපි විවෘත කිරීම මහජන බැංකුව හරහා සිදු කරන්නේ. ඒ අනුව අපි අවශ්‍ය මුදල් ඩොලර් ප්‍රමාණය සහ රුපියල් ප්‍රමාණය ලබා දෙන්න එකඟතාවය පළ කරලා තියෙනවා මහජන බැංකුවට. ඒ නිසා අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා අද දවස තුල ණයවර ලිපි විවෘත වීමෙන් පසුව අපිට නිශ්චිත වශයෙන් ඊළඟ පෙට්‍රල් සහ ඩීසල් නෞකාව මේ රටට ළඟාවන දිනය ඔබට දැනුවත් කරන්න පුළුවන් එක.
The supply of jet fuel or aviation fuel, an essential type of fuel to ensure that flights operate without interruption, has also been a concern for Sri Lanka. The last shipment of jet fuel landed in Sri Lanka on the 11th of June. According to the Energy Minister, a cost of around $50 million is incurred to import jet fuel. Due to the concerns, Sri Lanka is recommending airlines to carry sufficient jet fuel to last return trips or fill up elsewhere. With the situation at hand, the Energy Minister said an agreement will be entered into with a private company to supply jet fuel to Sri Lanka.
අපි යෝජනා කැඳවීමක් කරා. ඒ යෝජනාවලට සමාගම් 6ක් ඉදිරිපත් වෙලා තිබුණා ගුවන් යානා සඳහා ඉන්ධන ලබා දෙන්න. ඒ අනුව වඩාත් සුදුසුම මූල්‍ය යෝජනාව සඳහා පෙරේද දවසේ තිබුණු කැබිනට් අනුකාරක කමිටුව ඒ සඳහා අනුමැතිය ලබා දුන්නා. ඒ අනුව අද අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා මේ සමාගමත් එක්ක ගිවිසුම් ගත වෙන්න. ඒ අනුව ඉදිරියේදී ගුවන් යානා ඉන්ධන පිළිබඳව අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා ගිවිසුම් ගත වීම ක්‍රියාත්මක වුණොත් කනිත්තෙල් සංස්ථාවට බරක් වෙන්නේ නැතුව මහා භාණ්ඩාගාරයට බරක් වෙන්නේ නැතුව ඔවුන්ම ඒක ආනයනය කරලා කනිත්තෙල් සංස්ථාව හරහා ගුවන් සමාගම් වලට අලෙවි කරලා ඒ අලෙවියෙන් ලැබෙන මුදල් වලින් අර ඔවුන් ගෙනාපු ආනයනය කරපු වියදම පියවා ගැනීම සඳහා තමයි අපි ගිවිසුම් ගත වෙන්න යෝජනා කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා ඒ වෙනුවෙන් හෙට දවස් ඉඳලා ඒක ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙයි කියලා.
Meanwhile, the country's only refinery located in Sapukaskanda has begun refining crude after several months of inactivity.
අපි උපරිම ධාරිතාවෙන් තාමත් නිෂ්පාදන කටයුතු කරන්නේ නැහැ සපුගස්කන්ධ පිරිපහදුව. මොකද අපි මාස 3කට පස්සේ තමයි මේ කටයුතු ආරම්භ කරේ. ඒ වගේම අපි ඊළඟ නෞකාව එනකන් අපි ඒක කළමනාකරණය කරගත යුතු තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ වන විට සාමාන්‍යයෙන් දෛනිකව මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 350ක් පමණ පෙට්‍රල් නිෂ්පාදනය වෙනවා අපේ පිරිපහදුවේ. ඒ වගේම ඩීසල් මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 600ක පමණ ප්‍රමාණයක් නිෂ්පාදනය වෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව දැවි තෙල් ගුවන් යානා වලට අවශ්‍ය ඉන්ධන සියල්ලම මේ වන විට මේ පිරිපහදුව හරහා අපි නිෂ්පාදන කටයුතු කරනවා. අපේ මේ කළමනාකරණ සැලසුම ඇතුලේ පිරිපහදුවෙන් ලැබෙන නිෂ්පාදනය ඇතුළත් වෙලා නැහැ. එනිසා ඒ නිෂ්පාදනයෙන් ලැබෙන දේ තව අමතර අපිට සංචිතයක් හැටියට තමයි අපේ මේ සංචිත වලට එකතු වෙන්නේ.
And now on the situation of gas distribution in Sri Lanka, LPG distribution at the Litrogas Lanka terminal was only limited to the 37.5 kilogram cylinder today. According to the company's new plan, essential services including restaurants, hospitals and crematoriums will be prioritized. The gas distribution resumed after 11 days of a halt yesterday, following the clearance of 3,000 metric tons of LPG in a shipment on Monday. Also yesterday, Litro Chairman Mudita Pires said that the cabinet has agreed to purchase LPG from its current Omani gas supplier, as the company has assured its ability to provide uninterrupted supplies for the next 4 months. The other prospective supplier, Siam Gas of Thailand, although having quoted a cheaper price, has stated that it can only provide a limited supply of LPG to Sri Lanka. In some of the biggest news in business news across the world, U.S. Federal Reserve has announced the biggest interest rate hike in almost 30 years, which already have begun to have a global impact. After a 2-day monetary policy meeting, the U.S. Central Bank decided to increase its key interest rates by 0.75%, which range between 1.5% to 1.75%. The massive hike in the interest rate is expected to tame the rapid inflation rates and slow down economic activity in the U.S., allowing time for recovery. There have been an array of rate increases since May, and the U.S. Feds alert the consumers that further hikes to be expected considering the uncertainty the economy is facing. According to chief economist at an agency that central banks around the world, the globe, are moving in the same direction, tightening their policies in sync with the United States. This will cause massive shifts in global economy and business, and the public will face great challenges in the borrowing sector. The increase is already showing impact as the demand for dollars have increased, while, however, putting emerging markets in massive debt. Unemployment rates are expected to rise sharply, which is now at 3.6% and is expected to rise to 3.7% and reach 4.1% by 2024. Now, the Colombo Bourse continued its downward trajectory for a third consecutive day in response to the biggest Fed rate hike since 1994 of 75 basis points and possibly of another hike next month to contain the rampant U.S. inflation. The all-share price index at the Colombo Stock Exchange witnessed a slight upscale in the beginning but failed to hold on to the position as retailers exited selected stocks due to marginal calls. Meanwhile, institutional investors continued to remain on the sideline. With that, the index closed lower to nearly 1.5-week low at 7,705, losing 67 points. With retailers reducing their positions in the market, turnover significantly declined compared to previous day and was recorded at 0.8 million rupees, with a joint contribution of 53% from capital goods and food, beverage and tobacco sectors. Foreign investors remain net sellers while recording moderate participation. Asian stocks fell and the dollar regained its footing today as investors continued to digest the impact of the surging inflation and an aggressive policy tightening outlook from global central banks. The Asian stocks started off strong but shed most gains as markets closed. However, Tokyo's Nikkei trimmed earlier gains but still closed up 0.40% at 26,431.20. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's benchmark Hang Seng Index closed at near 3-week lows, ending the day down at 2.17% at 20,845.43. The Australian shares gave up early gains as the ASX 200 closed 0.20% lower at 6,589.4 points. At the same time, South Korean shares erased much of the early gains made to find a tad higher, and with the benchmark Kospi up 0.16% at 2,451. Well, in Asia, Japan has recorded its biggest single-month trade deficit in more than 8 years in May this year, as high commodity prices and decline in yen swelled imports, clouding the country's economic outlook. The growing trade deficit underscores the impediments the world's third largest economy faces from a slide in its currency, the yen, and supplying surging costs of fuel and raw material on which domestic manufacturers rely for production. Japan's imports soared 48.9% in the year-to-month of May, outpacing a 15.8% year-on-year rise in exports in the same month, resulting in a trade deficit of 2,385 trillion yen or $17.8 billion trade gap, the largest shortfall in a single month since January 2014. The deficit in May, the second largest in a single month on record, marked the 10th straight month of year-on-year shortfalls. By region, exports to China, Japan's largest trading partner, shrank 0.2% in the 12 months to May on weaker shipments of machinery and transport equipment to the country. Shipments bound for the United States, the world's largest economy, rose 13.6% in May thanks to stronger exports of machinery and mineral fuels, though those of motor vehicles fell. Overall imports were pushed up strongly by larger shipments of oil from the United Arab Emirates and coal and liquefied natural gas from Australia. Although Japan's economy is expected to grow an annualized 4.1% this quarter, a slide in the yen is threatening to hurt consumer sentiment as higher fuel and food costs inflict pain on households. Now, oil prices erased early gains to head lower today, a day after a fall triggered by a U.S. interest rate hike. Though tight supply limited losses, prices slipped more than 2% overnight after the Fed rate hike. Meanwhile, Russian gas supply to Europe fell further today as the continent looks to fill storage ahead of winter while pledging to reduce its reliance on Russian gas in the future. Brent crude futures were down 45 cents or 0.4% to $118.06 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 44 cents to $114.87, also off 0.4%. In Libya, oil output has collapsed to 100,000 to 150,000 barrels per day, a fraction of the 1.2 million barrels per day seen last year. That is hitting already tight supply, while the International Energy Agency said it expects demand to rise further in 2023, growing by more than 2% to a record 101.6 million barrels per day. U.S. crude stocks and distillate inventories rose, while gasoline inventories fell in the week through June 10th. Meanwhile, Russian gas supply to Europe fell further today, sparking concerns about refilling storage for winter and igniting a diplomatic tussle as Russian supplier Gazprom blamed Western sanctions for hampering maintenance work. The drop in supply comes as the leaders of Germany, Italy and France visit Ukraine under pressure to provide Kiev more weapons for its war with Russia and back its bid to join the European Union. Russian supplier Gazprom today announced a second cut to supply in as many days to Germany, slashing flows to just 40% of capacity. Germany's economy said the move was aimed at sowing uncertainty and pushing up energy prices. Dutch wholesale gas prices, the European benchmark, meanwhile jumped up to 25% on Thursday morning. Gas flows to Italy were also down, and the Czech power utility has also observed a similar cut to its Russian gas supply. Austria too has been informed of a reduction in gas deliveries. They also come as the continent looks to fill storage for winter while pledging to reduce its reliance on Russian gas in the future. A woman has thrown her 5-year-old child into the Kalani River at the Derana Bridge in Wattala last night and has attempted to commit suicide herself by jumping into the river. The woman was, however, apprehended by residents in the area and handed over to police. Police said that search operations were launched using fishing boats to locate the missing 5-year-old child, but they are yet to find the child. Police are continuing search operations with the assistance of the Navy. The mother in question has been taken into custody by Wattala police and she is to be produced before the Valisara Magistrates Court. And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9, your English news on AdaDerana 24. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.